So we're here with Austin Wentzlaff from Nook, unofficially the HubSpot QSO. I've seen that all over LinkedIn, and Austin, I'm sure, is plenty experience with HubSpot, but we wanted to talk to Austin because he's got experience in CRM in general, and it's an area that I find very interesting because of some of the challenges that I've seen at my three credit unions that I've been at over the nearly three decades in the movement. So I think Austin is our first panelist from the CRM series that we've started here at the podcast. So I wanted to welcome Austin as our Virgin Podcast CRM expert. So welcome, Austin. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you and Nook?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And I like how you said the unofficial HubSpot QSO, because I don't think we can make official claim to that, but that has been what a lot of people have been referring to us as, because we are a QSO and we do a lot with HubSpot. So you can make that conclusion for sure. But yeah, I think my backstory, I guess, is I have spent a long time, at least in terms of relative to my lifespan in the credit industry. It's a little over a decade. I got my start right out of college, had no idea what a credit union was, nor did I aspire to go work in the industry. But I got excited about entrepreneurship, which brought me to startups. And I joined a startup that did data warehousing and data analytics for credit unions. That was also a QSO. That was on approach back in the day, and had a good stint there. We got acquired. I left and then started a consultancy called FinTech Accelerator. And then the whole point of FinTech Accelerator was I wanted to find the best up and coming solutions that I think should be in this industry, and then help them crack into the industry, because it can be pretty hard to sell to credit unions. So getting to bring those solutions was a lot of fun. And I worked with Illuma, which was Illuma Labs at the time, and Renify, and both of those companies also became QSOs during my tenure there. And then now I'm at Nook, which I can go into deeper detail on there too. But like I said, Nook's also a QSO. So this is my fourth QSO that I've been a part of in the last 12 years.
That's great. I absolutely appreciate the pedigree of QSOs and credit union movement. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Nook and what Nook does and how Nook serves the credit union movement?
Yeah, for sure. I think to do that, I want to take a quick step back. I'll explain kind of what brought me to this point of starting Nook. So, like I said, I've been in the industry for a little over a decade. And during that decade, I've just been kind of observing what is happening to the industry. Where were we really strong in the past? Where are we maybe not that anymore? And where are we going to be that hopefully in the future, to be able to position ourselves in a terms of position of strength. And what I came to the conclusion of was credit unions of the past had two really strong core differentiators. Differentiator number one was we were the best on rates. We were that because of our tax advantage status. We aren't that anymore because of fintech competitors that are willing to lose money at all costs to acquire customers. So that's a differentiator we had, which we don't have anymore in most cases. And I don't know that we'll ever have that again. Also not a problem I was willing to try to solve. I can't get these guys to stop losing money intentionally, so I wasn't focused on that. But the other differentiator that I noticed was that we were the best on relationships. But I kind of came to the conclusion that credit unions got to become the best on relationships really as an accidental consequence of their design, meaning we were built for one group of people. And if you're built for one group of people, it's very easy to understand who they are, what they need, how we should talk to them. If they're the utilities employees credit union, I can put a guy on a utility pole with a hard hat working the lines, and that's going to resonate really well with that individual. But again, credit unions aren't that anymore. We've expanded way past our initial single seg, single field of membership type of environments that we once started with. And therefore, we now have to, if we want to reclaim our number one seat as the top relationship owners, which I think we can and will do, we now have to be a lot more intentional this time around. And for us, that intentionality means better data, better tech, better strategy, better execution. And when we looked at this, we said better tech for us is going to be HubSpot, which also, obviously is a CRM and then some, But that's what brought us to this journey, was how do we build deep relationships with our members so that credit unions can win in the future, and CRM is a component of what's needed to help that next leg of growth for us.
Mm. But Austin, all the core vendors have CRM products that are attached to their core. The core vendors have been very diligent over the last 40 years in providing a vertical stack that they want you to stay in without speaking to specific features and functionalities. Why do you think there are still, to this day, a lot of credit unions that are still locked into whatever core CRM relationship tool is available from your core vendor?
Yeah, I think you're trying to get me in trouble here, I see.
Nope.
But no, I think the core provided solutions, this goes for CRMs, data warehouses, all of the different kind of out of the box capabilities the cores have provided. A
Mhm.
lot of them do work decently well, but they work for a very specific use case, which is you're on Pfizer DNA, or you're on Scimitar Epicus, or you're on whatever core it is. Well, CRM, data warehouse, all of those things obviously need more data from different sources that aren't that provider, that speak different languages. And it really starts to become limited when you start thinking about it more from an enterprise scale. So I think some of those tools work and they serve a good purpose. But once you start saying no, CRM and data, that's actually an enterprise function, that's where they kind of fall apart. So we see HubSpot or solutions like HubSpot, kind of solving that problem. There's still work to be done to get them to be an enterprise, platform where they can integrate data from loan origination and core and payments and all that stuff. But they are architected in a better manner to accommodate that versus the core specific ones were architected specifically for a core.
Uh, That was very diplomatic. Well done.
Thank you.
So, whenever there's the CRM conversation comes up, I hear a lot of people instantly recoil because of past histories with having to deal with, pipelines and manual input of leads and a lot of focus on the sales side of CRM and relationship management in general. Where do you fall specifically, you and Nook, and over the last 10 years that you've spent sort of in the movement, where do you see CRM sitting in the credit union ops stack, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, I think where I look at it is kind of to take a step back on my own journey here is I started my career on data warehousing, like I said, and kind of the promise of data warehousing is once you have this single source of truth, the holy grail is unlocked and all things will be available to you. The
Mhm.
problem is it's still missing that activation layer. What are you going to do next with that data, and how are you going to automate that? And I think that's been the gap of where CRMs have failed in the past too, is that they are that activation layer. You can do those things with it, but they also need that data first. So we are kind of the bridge in between those, where it's like we almost need to build a data warehouse, if you will. That's our Nook data platform. We don't tell people it's a data warehouse. That's not our claim to fame or what we're trying to do. But essentially, you need an enterprise data integration engine that can get all the data cleaned up and readily available. And then you need to put that into, in our case, HubSpot. And then HubSpot's able to now build the automations, the workflows, the segments, and fire off real time things with trigger events. So that's kind of, I think, where the promise has fallen short on both of those things. We're trying to come in and connect those dots. And I think a lot of it is, one, not a lot of people have thought about it exactly that way. But two, I think it's advancements in technology that allow us to do this. We're able to build stuff a lot more efficiently than you used to be able to build stuff. Like
Mhm.
core system integrations is a great example of that. Those are a beast. They're
Yeah.
difficult, they're complicated, but it's getting easier, and
Mhm.
because it's getting easier, we're able to build a more end-to-end comprehensive solution that doesn't cost $20,000 a month right out the gate. I think that's been the hindrance of, like, yeah, I have a data warehouse product and I want a CRM, but
Mhm.
both of them out of the box are $8,000 a pop. It's like, that's where it gets difficult. Yeah.
So have you sort of cracked the code and come up with a framework or an infrastructure that basically a credit union sits their CRM product, whatever that is, in your case it'd be HubSpot, on top of to provide next best product, actions, things like that. You're essentially building out an orchestration layer that lets you do things with data coming from disparate data sources. Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's, we always say it's an industry agnostic, industry standardized data model. So we don't really care what the source system is. We
Uh-huh.
want the HubSpot architecture to look the same from our clients so that we can
Uh-huh.
start to, we're trying to do what CUSOs are supposed to do. Let's bring the resources of the industry together. Let's work on
Uh-huh.
common problems and let's tackle that together. You can't do that if you're on your own independent system, your own independent journey of HubSpot. So someone has to come in and normalize things, standardize it, and do all of that heavy lifting
Uh-huh.
first. And then once you do that, yeah, then there's a lot more, opportunity. And I think, you mentioned a couple of good examples like next best product, attrition modeling, those types of things. Those are definitely things you can start doing now that you have this. And
Okay.
what we love about, like I said earlier, the data plus the activation layer is we can automate a lot of this now, and we can set it up to where the moment Jason's next best product is an auto loan, we fire off that trigger and no human needs to get involved in that process. We
Mm-hmm.
know the data, we know the analysis, we know the template that's going to go out about an auto loan. And the moment that you get added to that list, you get that email.
Mm-hmm. So you said there one of the advantage, one of the differentiators we had was rate, which I would agree with you. That's those days are long gone. We, you know, even just from an efficiency perspective, fintechs can do better, faster, smarter, and they've got the capital to make sure that their products and services get delivered way quicker, so their margins are much smaller than ours. So we're definitely not going to compete there. On the relationship side, things like next best product, 360 view, degree view, all of those sort of, marketing catchphrases around building the relationship, or at least storing the relationship digitally in a platform that is then actionable for the colleagues. We call our employees colleagues. So whenever I say colleague, I mean employee of the credit union. So is that the new differentiator for credit unions? And is there a sort of an asset size that's an entry point? I don't think a $30 million credit union is going to have an orchestration layer, is going to have like a big HubSpot CRM deployment. Where do you see sort of the sweet spot of when credit unions should be talking about operationalizing some of this data that's available so that they can become more actionable and they use that data?
Yeah, I actually think the bar is becoming a lot lower. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of it comes to what I was saying earlier about our ability to build this technology a lot more cost effectively than it once was. Building a data integration to a core 10 years ago was a person or a group of people sitting down and writing SQL or whatever, whatever programming language you're using. And it's
Mhm.
lines and lines and lines of code and hours upon hours of development. Whereas obviously there's advancements with the AI technology there. So I think where a $100 million credit union 5 years ago could never afford a data layer to then populate their CRM/marketing automation platform. We're changing that. We actually have $100 million clients now that have legit, robust data infrastructure that was once unattainable for them. And
Mhm.
we're doing it on an asset based pricing model. So it's affordable to them because, that's just what the industry is used to. So we're building our pricing model, to accommodate that. So yeah, I think it's not a $1 billion plus luxury anymore as it
Mhm.
once was. And I think too, pricing from a HubSpot perspective is another thing that I've been actually surprised myself about when I've come into these $100 million credit unions. I have them kind of do an analysis with me of, okay, what are you paying for now? You have a email marketing tool, you have a social tool, you have a survey tool, you have all these things that I can potentially consolidate. Like, let's add it up. In
Uh,
two of the last instances where we signed up with $100 million credit union, HubSpot was cheaper
Wow.
was cheaper to go to a better platform for them. It
And you
was
can
kind
throw
of
a chat bot on their website. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that are kind of bolt-ons to HubSpot specifically, but all of the platforms have similar, value propositions. So, uh, the it's great to hear that $100 million credit unions are getting into the game because, to your original point, competing on rate and, competing with some of these fintechs is impossible. It's hard to keep up. And you mentioned attrition and tracking attrition. I think that's more important today than even pipelining and having an eyeball fixed on adding new memberships. You got to keep an eye on the existing members. One, it's way more expensive to acquire a new member. And if you can just, get some insight into what's happening with your members when they're on the way out the door, this isn't an instant thing. It takes time. You see direct deposit slow down. You see, debit card activity decrease. And if you can get ahead of that stuff, it's more cost effective to just hang on to them. Even if it's just a matter of generating an email or two, or an outbound phone call, anything. So I love that. You mentioned repeatable, and I'm curious from a core perspective. One of I think the challenges that we have in the movement is there are a small subset of core providers that have a disproportionately large share of the market. Does that make it easier or more difficult for organizations like Nook to exist? Have you found that it is a repeatable process for any Premier client, any DNA client, any Scimitar client? Is it rinse and repeat in a lot of cases, or are the credit unions shooting themselves in the foot with over customization and just being completely difficult with their data?
I think there's definitely some of the latter scenario there, but I think we know everybody uses Scimitar Epicus differently,
Sure.
and Pfizer DNA and all the core systems. They're not all identical in their use case. Like in Scimitar, in particular, I know it's to be 70% standard, 30% custom fields. So
Mhm.
those 30% custom for sure the Wild West. But even the 70% standard, we still use those kind of differently. We have
Mhm.
different ways of populating the data in there. So those are nuances that we have to deal with. But the good news is we have been able to find an ability to standardize those and to make it to where we can get it into our data model in a nice, clean, standardized way, and then also have that CRM or the HubSpot architecture match that as well. So our Scimitar to Nook data model doesn't look all that different than Pfizer DNA to Nook data model. I
Mhm.
might be mistaken here. I'm pretty sure Pfizer DNA is a member centric data model. Scimitar Epicus is an account centric data model. I know that one for sure. Those are two different ways of looking at things. So we, as the partner that's saying we're focused on RevOps, which RevOps is sales, service, and marketing. We're focused on those use cases. Those are all member centric use cases. Account
Mhm.
centricity doesn't do you any good there because the marketers care about what does this member need from me? How am I going to talk to this member? So
Mhm.
we have to take Scimitar and make it more marketing friendly,
Mhm.
and we do that with every system that we work with. But that all goes through the standardized Nook data model that we've developed.
How much of the engagement that you have with credit unions is, trying to find a nice way to say this, unwinding, in some cases, decades worth of, probably not the right word, misuse of the core, and, having multiple persons in, let's just say in Epicus, having multiple person records in Epicus that are all slightly different. Some have social, some don't. Some have first name, some don't. Some have middle initials, some don't. How much time are you spending, at a typical engagement with sanitizing the data and cleaning it up and doing a lot of that normalization?
Yeah, we've made a pretty important business decision that is that we are not here to fix all of the data problems that have been generated in the last, 2 decades, but we are aware of them and we will make you aware of them. And we also
Yep.
are starting to put processes in place so that you can work around them. So like a good example is we use SSN as our unique identifier. We don't
Mhm.
send SSN into the CRM. That stays behind. That's another important part of our architecture. but we can use it to derive a new unique identifier in there. But in some cases, even though SSN is a really, really good unique identifier, it's not perfect. So we're starting to put in indicators that say whether or not we're 100% certain that this is the right person, like a verified check mark, kind of way to think about it, like your Twitter verified or an unverified, so that when a person's using the data, they can go, "Yep, this data is with absolute certainty. We know it's correct." And there's a lot more, examples of that, or where we come across data and we say, "Hey, just so you know, we're not very confident in this. You shouldn't be either. Ideally, you would fix it in the core, but we're probably not going to." But that is actually a thing that we are now seeing an uptick from, when our clients really appreciating that about us, is like, we are calling out, "Hey, there's some crap going on in your core that if you fixed, it would make our next load easier. It would make your experience easier. We can verify this data better." And some of them are starting to think about, how do we use Nook as a data quality tool, essentially, not an add-on service or anything, but we're going to take the output and we'll manually go into the core system. I think the dream state is that we would be able to do a bi-directional sync, and that you could fix it in HubSpot and then sync it back to the core, which I know you can do. We just haven't got that far yet. We don't have any client pushing us too hard on that exact use case yet.
So would it be fair to say you tend to focus on accuracy over precision? And for the most part, accuracy is good enough. If you've got some not quite straight data, you can live with that because, it's an outlier. You don't have, 60,000 data quality issues. You have a handful, and it's not really going to be a material problem. It might be for that one particular member who may get, 2 pieces of marketing collateral sent to them via email. But at the end of the day, you're still serving 59,998 members really, really well. It's just that one member that has, maybe a couple of emails that they shouldn't get, and you fix it and you move on.
Yeah, exactly. You're never going to get 100%. And if you try to, you are going to forever live in data quality resolution, which I've seen happen in the past, and you just never move forward. So you kind of have to get to a point where it's like, and also I think the other thing too is, it's nothing we're doing is creating a new problem. It's just saying, "Hey, this problem exists in your core. So Nook found it, but had we not found it, you would have still acted on
the problem. Yeah.
And I think, so another good example of that too, that we do solve for, so this is a data quality resolution thing that Nook provides, is, say, like the type case. So if you put in Jason in all caps and Scimitar, that's going to come over to HubSpot, or it would. In our Nook data model, we've created logic that says, no, only the first initial should be, and change that. But let's say that person has like an O'Brien type of name, where it's first and second both capitalized. Well, your logic can only be so intelligent, because how often is the full caps name a name like that?
You could probably do it with a regular expression, but again, accuracy versus precision. Is it worth the extra compute resources to go through and say, "Hey, first letter," but if you see an apostrophe in that situation, the next one also is capital. And then some cores like apostrophes and some don't. So some have it and some don't. Sometimes there are space. So you could solve for it all if you really wanted to, but what is the point at the end of the day? You've got one or two names that may look slightly different. And if they're in all caps everywhere else except for the email campaign that you happen to send the member, I think that's probably okay. So you had mentioned some of the marketing automation pieces. I want to give love to all of the departments. So for a CRM, where do you see, like, what percentage? I don't know that that's necessarily a fair way to frame it, but there's service, there's sales and business development, and then there's marketing automation. For a credit union, and this is going to be different for different credit unions, but generally for credit unions, how do you slice up the big CRM pie between those three groups? And did I miss anybody?
No, I think you hit it pretty well on the head. I think my world might be a little skewed, in the sense that I'm dealing with HubSpot, and HubSpot tends to be a marketing platform first. So much so that a lot of times when I'm talking to clients, they're like, well, when do we do the CRM project? And I'm like, you already did it. It's the underpinnings of HubSpot is the CRM.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no extra CRM project, but it's because that kind of old school logic of CRM equals sales. It's a
Yep.
sales tool. So like when the marketing team gets this HubSpot platform, they're not thinking about it from a CRM standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in our case, CRM is owned by marketing to start. And I think it does make sense that they own it because a lot of the inputs or the data that's in the CRM is data you would want to be able to build automations and real-time trigger events and those things that would go out from a marketing perspective, emails, SMS, that type of stuff. But there's other credit unions that are adopting Salesforce, and Salesforce is much more, it's much more brought in by salespeople first,
Mm-hmm.
and then marketing. There's an add-on called Salesforce Marketing Cloud, but a lot of times those clients don't have Marketing Cloud. They also have HubSpot, or they
Yep.
have a different marketing tool,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's an evolving, who's who owns this is definitely changing, but I definitely think everybody should be involved in it. And that's why we talk about Nook as a RevOps company and not a marketing company. RevOps is the interconnectivity of sales, service, and marketing through technology and data. So we
Mm-hmm.
want all of those players at the table owning their piece of it, not HubSpot being a marketing tool, as an example.
So you didn't give me a percentage. So I'm gonna push back because one of the first points you made was one of the differentiators is the relationship. So take yourself out of being the CEO of Nook, but also having 10 years, of time served in the credit union movement. How do you see the breakout of those three different business units using the CRM product, that differentiator that you started off the podcast with, as our go forward? Like, I think we're all in agreement, rate, good luck with that. But relationship building, I saw a survey fairly recently that for the first time in, I think, forever, credit unions no longer have an advantage at trust and customer service that they once did. So how do we reclaim that crown? And is it shifting some of the percentage from service and business development away from marketing? Or are we 33 and a third percent across the board? And, there might be some differentiation from credit union to credit union. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's probably like a 60 to 70% marketing right now,
Mm-hmm.
and then like a 20% sales business development, and then a 0 to 10% service right now, really. I
Wow.
think the numbers should be 30, 30, 30 or
Okay.
33. I think, maybe one group should have a bigger percentage because someone should always own the thing, and you can never do that
Mhm.
with complete democratic type of situation, I don't think.
Yep.
But yeah, I think like I'll give you a good example of where I think these three groups should come together in a real-time automation. So credit unions today will send out surveys, like an NPS survey, and a member will give you a 2 out of 10. I am not happy right now. Your service is terrible. The last branch visit I had was not great. What happens usually? Usually
Goes
that survey is
and it stays there. It shows up in an Excel spreadsheet, and once a year, somebody will look at it and go, "Huh, we're at 3.5, and we used to be at 3.6. What happened? I don't know. Move on."
right, exactly. It's usually an endpoint. It's we did a survey and it
Yep.
dies. But what should happen, where I'm hoping the industry will go, is sales, service, and marketing are all sharing ownership in this CRM. So when a 2 out of 10 happens, multiple things happen. One is an automated email from marketing goes out saying, "We're sorry you feel that way. We can do better. This is not the standard that we want for our credit union." All that warm and fuzzy kind of apology type of stuff. Automated trigger. At the same time, you can also do an automated trigger to update that CRM record. Put an unhappy member flag in there. So anybody that logs into it knows this person's not feeling good about us. You can also build a trigger that says, do not send this person any marketing, related information. So these are mostly marketing things first. Secondarily is they might be in a sales process right now. They might be going through a loan origination process. Sales should know about that, or sales should know to not try to enter them into a new sales process because that'd be like, hey, I'm really unhappy. Okay, would you like to buy another thing from me? It's like, you didn't
Mhm.
hear me at all. You're not
Yep.
listening to me, So you want to tell that sales group, do not sell. And that can be done with that sales flag. It can be done with automated internal notifications, all of that. And then the same thing on service. Somebody on the service team should be notified. We should probably pick up the phone if it's that bad of a member experience. They just gave us a 2 out of 10. We
Mhm.
should call them and say, hey, I know you got an email from my marketing team kind of apologizing, but I personally wanted to reach out to. So
Mhm.
that's like equal ownership of that one thing where sales, service, and marketing all should and can be involved. The problem is in the past, that's impossible to do because of what you just said.
Mhm.
That's a survey that now turns into an Excel spreadsheet. In order to take that Excel spreadsheet, I now need to go to 3 different groups and tell them manually what to do next. And like that's where it all falls apart. You're not going to do that. And I think, kind of the same thing with some data analytics where it's like, hey, we have a report, but
Yep.
someone has still to grabs that report, do the thing with it. And I think the new era that we're in is all of what I just described is not science fiction at all. We can
Yep.
easily set that process in workflow up.
Well, your example, I think, is spot on because I over the years at multiple credit unions, whether it's Radin or Baker Hill or any number of third-party data analytics groups that go through and survey members and look at transaction history and all that sort of stuff to give us a sneak peek or a view of our membership and satisfaction and things like that. Those are single event activities. We get a report, we look at report, we pat ourselves on the back or wring our hands and say we need to do better here, and then 12 months goes by and we do rinse and repeat. We do it over and over and over again. I think CRM and some of these tools, certainly looking at OKRs and KPIs and having some sort of data layer that gives us insight into our membership's actual day to day, I think helps surface those things that right now for most credit unions are annual reviews and I would say at maybe high performing credit unions, they're quarterly at the most. They're certainly not day to day. They're certainly not instantly reactive to a negative service, incident. So all the stuff you mentioned, I think, you made the point of saying it's not science fiction. So let's talk a little bit science fictiony. Let's talk about 5 years from now, or if you're a progressive credit union that has, maybe some resources and some talent, maybe is a little bit more near future, tomorrow, next year, next month. Let's talk about some of the agentic tools that we're starting to see that to one of the points that you made earlier. Traditionally, the CRMs have been a one-way tool. It's a window into other systems of records data so that, we have, that you could always you just call it single pane of glass, whatever you want to call it, to take a look at data from disparate data sources. But with some of the agentic tools, and certainly with some of the advances in low code, no code, and all those sorts of things, and drag and drop, and Claude Code and MCP, and all of that, acronym soup. What does the future look like? Are we going to start to see maybe some of those percentage points shift away from business dev and move to service? I think marketing automation is probably here to stay because we still need acquisition. We still need to be able to reach out to the members. But are we looking at the renaissance of the service CRM or CRM as a platform for service for credit unions?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the reason is because, again, like I said earlier, the problem with the promise of data warehousing in the past and CRM of the past is somebody still needs to act on that. And in order to sit down to make sense of it, to take the action, it's a lot. It's a lot to do, and it's a lot for someone to think about. Whereas an agent that you can set up to do that activity, they can just do it when it comes up and make these things happen. So I think the future is we're going to first go to a hybrid model, which is our CRM, our data analytics are designed today to be consumed by humans and acted on by humans. So we're not in hybrid yet. Hybrid means we're going to start to introduce agents into the mix. So humans and agents will work side by side within this CRM data environment. And then more and more as we go into the future, I think the humans will start to become less and less involved. Like I actually envision a situation where people stop logging into things like HubSpot. Like there's not a need to. I can interface through it with Claude as an example. And that's, or I just set up an agent and I have enough automations built that the human doesn't need to. And I think that's what you're seeing, obviously, Wall Street respond to. If you look at the SaaS apocalypse that they're calling it, if you look at the stock price of Salesforce or HubSpot or any of these companies that have had seat-based models, that's what they're saying. They're saying you built your business around human butts sitting in those seats, and we don't know if there's going to be a human sitting in those seats anymore. So what happens to those seats? Do they go away? Can you sell a seat to an agent at the same price? Or does an agent seat cost $5 where it used to be 150? Like, I do think that's where we're heading, is that you're gonna, same thing again. I have obviously a deep data, analytics background. So I think the same thing is true with like the data warehousing realm. Is what most data warehouses have today is a lot of reports and dashboards and things that you're supposed to go into to make sense of, to then take the next action on. I think reports and dashboards go away. I don't think you need them anymore. I think you say, hey, Claude, or whatever tool you're going to be using for, your agent tool, you go in there and you say, you make sense of the data, you report back to me. And we don't need to have this library of 500 reports sitting there that 2% of them get used.
Yeah, your butt in seat license is going to pivot over to a resource consumption model. So, now you're going to start paying for compute and storage and transfer, and I'm not a fan. It's so much harder to forecast, and especially when you're in an environment where the butt in seat model didn't necessarily get the same or the expected level of use. So that at least is a very fixed relative cost. I know it costs $20 for a Power BI Pro license. I know what that cost is per month. And whether, Jane uses it or doesn't, it's $20 a month. Now, if Jane, we have this big movement, we decide we're going to do a lot more with data, Jane's all of a sudden just going to be data crazy, and my Snowflake bill is going to go through the roof because now we've got a ridiculous amount of consumption because Jane wants every piece of data and probably doesn't need it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting for the next few years. You see a lot of this anecdotal stuff, and some of it not anecdotal, about token usage going through the roof and organizations getting $500,000 bill for token consumption in Claude just because they gave it to everybody. That scares me a little bit. So we definitely need to make sure we've got the right guardrails in place when we move forward with some of these things. So
yeah, my hope is that we'll get to more of a success-based pricing model where you actually pay for real action that gets created, and HubSpot's actually experimenting with that right now on their prospecting agent. Like if the agent doesn't deliver and doesn't I don't know exactly what the criteria is that justifies success, but basically you don't pay unless it completes this action successfully. I think we'll be able to get to a state more like that, where it's not just how much are you consuming, but it's how much did we actually produce in value for you. I don't know. That might be a dream state too. I don't know that we can do that, especially for most use cases. I think prospecting is an easy one to say, yep, it was successful because this prospect came into our pipeline and the agent was responsible for doing that. But a lot of use cases are not that easy to define, and you can't just be like, oh, that was successful. It's like, no, there's 10 other things that need to happen before success happens, and you should pay compute power for those while we're doing them.
Absolutely. So we're touching on the business side of CRM and living in this world. Let's talk a little bit about specifically your interactions. I'm going to have the same question of all of my participants on this series. What challenges do you run into on this sales cycle trying to help a credit union that's already expressed some interest in moving forward with something? They may not even know what they want. I guess my first question is that a challenge? And how do you feel credit unions are prepared to ask the right questions in order to get the right product from, in your case, Nook?
Yeah, I think right now we're experiencing not a lot of friction in the sales process. Like we're actually kind of going gangbusters right now. And I think the industry has finally kind of turned and realized that this is a high priority. We do need to do this. I would say the challenge that I see though is more of a longer term expansion of the software and usage of it. And what I mean is, I think a lot of these implementations are starting off with maybe 5 seats, but that credit union has 500 people.
Yep.
So when do you get this to be a true enterprise CRM tool where the whole company is logging into that thing? Most credit unions that I'm working with today are taking that as a multi-year journey. And I do think it should be a multi-phase journey. I don't think you should try to do this all at once. I don't think you're ever going to get the culture adoption to like be like, hey, you in the branch, you're now using HubSpot tomorrow. Like
Mhm.
you need to first get comfortable with it, get comfortable with the data. The enterprise needs to get bought in, and then you start to roll it out. So I do think that makes sense.
Mhm.
But I think, as with most things credit unions do, we're taking it a little slower than we probably should. We should probably be looking at, let's do this sprint for the first 3 months.
Yep.
Then let's get the next, tranche of seats in here for the next 3 months.
Mhm.
Whereas in a lot of cases, it's like that next set of new seats or, new expansion of the software doesn't come anytime soon, and it probably
Mhm.
takes a little too long. So I think people know they want it, they know they need it, but because a lot of times this is what happens in my sales conversations with HubSpot involved is the credit union will say we're a credit union of 250 employees, and our aspiration is to get all of these people
Mhm.
in the CRM platform. And HubSpot, to no fault of their own, they go, "That's a lot of people.
250.
I'm
Awesome.
excited about this." Yeah, and I have to explain to both
Whoa.
groups, yeah, like, hey, that's a great aspirational goal, but
Yep.
when are we actually going to get there? And what's the
Mhm.
real starting point? And more often than not, the initial, we thought it was going to be this many seats gets cut down to 10%. So it
Yep.
starts at 10% of where we actually want the organization to be.
Mhm.
And I just don't see that extra 20%, 30%. I don't see that happening at the
Mhm.
speed in which they said it was going to happen when we first met with them.
What do high performing credit unions who have engaged with Nook, if there's one thing you could tell your next prospect, you've got a gold star, perfect client, implemented CRM is now, it has 500 seats, is firing on all cylinders. What did they do? What is one part of that implementation with that credit union that you would, if you could, make repeatable for every one of your engagements with other credit unions?
I think it would go back to what I said, which was the phased rollout approach. I
Mhm.
think they need to be cognizant of what they can actually handle, and then get and then figure out what those goals are and milestones for them to feel like we now have confidence in our data, confidence in the platform. We as a initial group of users feel like we can train the trainer and help the next group, and then you roll it out to the next people, and those people are responsible for helping them get onboarded. And that way it's just kind of more of a domino effect than trying to boil the ocean, because I think boiling the ocean is just going to result in a disaster, and I think we do see that happen sometimes where they do think they're ready for the 200 seats right away, and it's
Yep.
like, I might be wrong, but what I think is going to happen, nobody's going to take a lot of ownership. No one's going to be able to get that full buy-in, and it's just going to kind of flounder there. And you're going to be paying for 200 seats when you should be paying for 20. You know,
Mm, absolutely. What a lot of credit unions now are in the sales cycle for renewing or conversion to a different core. What are some things that credit unions should go into those negotiations, knowing that they have aspirations for down the road, looking at a CRM? Let's just assume they're not going to stick with whatever their core is providing. Let's start there. What conversations should they be having with their core vendor about things like SIM exchange, about core API for DNA, about access to the data? What's some advice that you would give credit unions to have those conversations so that they've got the tools that they're going to need when it comes time to start looking at that integration with HubSpot?
Yeah. Well, for the first thing I was going to say is, yeah, the contract negotiation, tell them, no, we don't need that CRM. I get that it's discounted heavily for my 10-year contract with you,
Yeah.
but you still don't need it. But
Yep.
no, I think the data access thing is actually it's a pretty serious problem in this industry. It's something that I am still really surprised happens today. Like some cores are better than others for sure, but there's some cores that we work with that they are beholden. The credit is beholden to them to get them anything.
Yep.
And we're working with one right now where the journey is going to be 2 months, 2 months before you can get the extract files to us. It's like, I can get those immediately from Scimitar. They're there every single day. They show up every morning and I know exactly where they live.
Yeah.
So like that would be a demand, that I would have as a credit union to say, how am I going to get the data? What access do I have? How beholden am I to you? What does that look like? Because
Yep.
if you can't extract your own data, that's a problem. You shouldn't be on that platform. And I do hope anyway, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble now for saying this, but I do hope that those core systems that are doing that are
Mhm.
not going to be here much longer, or at least
Agreed.
they'll change their ways
Uh-huh.
because it's their data. It's the
Yep.
credit union's data. And they're saying, no, 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 you can't extract it. We have to extract it for you,
Mhm.
which I wouldn't have as big of a problem with if they could do it in a day or two.
Yes.
2 months,
Yep.
like this is where I get frustrated. I'm like, I bet I could go into that core and I could throw Claude on it right now and I could get that data tomorrow.
You're frustrated. I'm a client. I feel the same way. Um, I'm, it's easy enough to find out who my core provider is, but we've had similar issues, even in scenarios where there are, let's just say, canned products available that will extract the information from said core in a format that's recognizable and supported and standardized. To take 8 weeks, 9 weeks just to get that delivered, installed, tested is insane. So I agree. There's got to be better ways to do it. What are your thoughts on? I know CRMs tend to be a little bit more batch. You tend to go back 24 hours, 30 days. Depends on what you're doing with the data. I would say the sooner the better. But what are your thoughts about real time access using things like Core API and SIM Exchange and stuff like that from some of the more modern core providers, or partnering with folks like Portex that have some pre-built API connectivity to some of the cores? What are your thoughts there? Is API overkill?
I think it's overkill right now, but I don't think it will be in the future. So I do think that we're moving in that direction. I think the most clients ask me about it, before we get on. They say, what's your data load frequency? Because we want real time. Because as you said earlier in this, there's a lot of marketing buzzwords, and real time is absolutely one of them. Real time, real time, real time. And I'm like, okay, for what? So I kind of go through. I'm like, if you can give me a real concrete answer, I'll a Genesee or a Portex or one of those companies that have it, because we don't, and that's not what we're building our model around.
Yep.
We're building on the foundation data that you need, and nightly batch is usually pretty good for almost all of that. But at the moment that a credit union says, no, I absolutely need it, and here's why I need it, then we'll go down that path. And I think my view of it is going to be, it's still going to be mostly batch. So it's not an all or nothing thing. It's not going to be all real time or all batch. It's going to be mostly batch because most use cases do not need to be real time. And then you'll work with a Portex or a Genesee and say, these 5 data elements, I need these called in real time. So
Mhm.
give me those things, and then we'll build that in parallel to our model. So yeah, that's kind of where my thing is at. The same thing is, I mentioned it earlier, but bidirectional syncing is another thing we get asked about. I think that's should come sooner than later too. I do think it's a real good goal, and I would love for us, like I said, we're identifying a lot of data quality issues. It'd be cool if you could use, because HubSpot has some data quality tools as well. So if you use their button that says fix this data, it doesn't fix the core.
Yep.
So my data load's going to override that
Mhm.
tomorrow because it didn't get fixed in the core. So
Yep.
those tools are kind of rendered useless. Whereas if we had a bidirectional sync, you could say, yep, fix all of the state short codes because we're using INN and N and Minnesota fully spelt out, and like we're doing everything. So you
Yep.
can fix that, and HubSpot recognizes it. But again, you need something to tell the core, hey, this was fixed. So
Absolutely.
it's coming. It's,
Mhm,
that's not a sci-fi thing. It's just I
mhm,
haven't had a credit union tell me with certainty like this is the use case worth spending more money on, because that's really what it boils down to. The technology exists to do real time and bi-directional. It's
mhm.
just it's more expensive. It's
Yep,
quite a bit more expensive actually to do those. So
absolutely. So, if I'm a credit union and I'm looking for information on, let's just say Nook and HubSpot, where will I go? Where should I go to get more information and consider what my first step in this journey is going to look like?
yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously this is a biased response to my own benefit here, but I would say come talk to us first.
Mhm,
I think the big thing is, we love HubSpot. They're a phenomenal partner, but they're not built for credit unions at the end of the day. And what ends up happening is a lot of times the sales process will start with HubSpot directly because the credit union will say, we want HubSpot. They don't know that Nook exists. They go to HubSpot as you would. And then HubSpot ultimately pulls us in and says,
mhm,
this is our credit union experts. We're going to bring them into the conversation. But a lot of times I'm 5 steps removed from where the conversation started. And we
mhm,
would have been able to have them ask some questions differently and start the process differently, scope what the total, software package is going to be a little bit differently. And we do help with that before any contract execution gets, done and everything. But I just think having that partner first goes a long way. And I think another thing is just it's an education thing. I have to figure out how I educate the market more on this because a lot of
mhm,
people perceive it as, well, if I bring Nook in, there's an extra cost because
mhm.
obviously Nook's got to make their cut.
Sure. Yep.
And the fact of the matter is, it's not how it works.
Yep.
HubSpot compensates us,
Mhm,
but the credit union has no extra fees. In fact,
mhm,
the HubSpot contract actually goes down if you use a partner. They
mm,
waive their onboarding fees, which then get replaced by us doing a
sure.
specialized onboarding and implementation.
Mhm,
Yeah, so it's no extra cost. We're here to be your partner.
mhm,
We're the ones that come in and say, hey, yeah, 200 seats sounds great, but I don't think you're ready. Are you ready? No.
mhm.
Okay, it's 20 seats then.
Yep. Well, and the benefit of getting out in front of it, you don't have to unwind a first swing at integration or building out what's in HubSpot. You can start in you could start on better footing with someone that's got a little bit more knowledge about credit union data than HubSpot by themselves would, or a marketing third party may have. So I definitely see the value in someone that's got 10 years worth of experience specifically dealing with this and data warehouse and credit union data, which is somewhat unique. I would definitely agree with that when you start talking about members and persons and accounts and orgs and joints and, authorized signers and trusts and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, unwinding all of that is a project in and of itself. So it's great to do that right from day one instead of having to go back and redo it. So,
Yeah, I think the biggest thing here is, well, this is another education thing for me, but you just hit the nail on the head, so I have to double down on it here. It's like they don't realize how important the partner is in this decision. The
mhm,
credit union thinks that the sole decision they're making is about, should I buy HubSpot or should I buy Salesforce
yep.
or Curatio or whatever they're looking
Mhm,
at. And the reality is those are only going to be as good as the data foundation that was built that they were built on top of. And I think that's where actually, in fact, the bulk of our clients today, Nook's growth has mostly been credit unions that were set up on HubSpot a year or two ago that
mhm,
were not set up on a good data foundation because the partner didn't have the same level of data expertise and history that we do.
mhm.
And then they hit a scalability wall. They say, I
Sure.
want to integrate my next data source. Well, you can't. You don't have a good, strong
Right.
identity resolution logic or unique identifier.
Mhm.
And they want to expand into sales and service because it should be a RevOps platform and not a marketing platform, but it
Yep.
wasn't architected that way.
Yep.
So it's the decision should be, which platform are we going to go with? Yes, that's a
Mhm.
really important one. But then equally important, it's which partner are we going to pick and who
Yep.
has that data, expertise and who's truly building this for credit unions. We're the only QSO that does this, and we're the only ones that have our own proprietary data platform too. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what sets us apart is we know we know how to do this and we know the nuances, and the credit union data is the nuance. It's the
There you
problem.
go. Yep. Absolutely. Well, this was awesome. Austin, I appreciate your 10 years of service in the movement and everything that Nook is doing, to support the movement. I absolutely appreciate your time here.
Likewise, I think that panel should be fun. You don't get a lot of your quote unquote competitors together
Yep.
to chat, and talk shop about what we're
Mhm.
building for the industry. So that should be fun.
Austin, I very much appreciate it. And, I look forward to our next session together. So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.